Can you please stop bothering my kid?
Sorry.
Arthur, I have some bad news for you. This is the last time we'll be meeting.
You don't listen, do you? You just ask the same questions every week. How's your job? Are you having any negative thoughts? All I have are negative thoughts.
And finally, in a world where everyone thinks they can do my job, check out this guy.
When I was a little boy and told people I was going to be a comedian, everyone laughed at me. Well, no one's laughing now.
Hello, and welcome to this week's Cinema Eclectica, the Geek Show's dedicated podcast to all things cinematic. And I'm joined this week by Graham.
Hello.
And Aidan.
Hello.
And I'm Mick.
Yes, later on in the show we'll have reviews of the Sammo Hung box set and a spirited defence of the Godfather Part 3. But before that, it's time for our film of the week, which could only really be one film this week, couldn't it?
Well, yeah.
I mean, that Renee Zellweger Judy Garland biopic is getting good reviews, but in terms of a film that might as well have been made to give people on podcasts something to argue about, we are doing Todd Phillips' Joker.
Yeah, I
I also thought that joke was some of my best material.
Where's the mute Mick button?
Listeners,
I'm sorry, I have a condition.
if you haven't seen the film, listeners, it'd be a bit like this.
See, we could have made it for a much lower budget.
We absolutely could. I generally think that movie studios haven't looked into the possibility of just releasing big blockbusters in podcast form.
Absolutely.
They'd have lost less money on Men in Black International.
Well, indeed. And they could have saved some... The Godfather. They could have saved so much on oranges.
Yes.
Yes.
But yes, aside from this tosh, we are reviewing Joker, the new film by Todd Phillips, which is... It's DC seem to be trying to dismantle their shared universe at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah, well, I mean, there was barely a mention of DC in the opening credits for this one. There was no sort of bold logo. And it was kind of almost an embarrassed based on characters created for comics DC a bit.
Yeah.
At the end.
Yeah, I mean, also, before this, I saw the trailer for Birds of Prey, and that had a very kind of, oh, don't worry about Suicide Squad, we're just taking one of the bits you might have liked from that and spinning her off into her own thing. So, I don't know. Cinematic universe is such a new term that there isn't really a term for this. I guess it's a series of unconnected cinematic galaxies.
But,
It's the standalone-iverse.
Yes.
Maybe this is it. Maybe DC have looked at the figures for their shared universe, and they've looked at the figures for Marvel's, and they thought, all right, there's clearly only room for one consistent shared universe. So what we'll do is we'll do a multiverse.
Maybe that's it. Yes. But whatever it is, what you've essentially got here is a Joker origin story that is, I mean, it's influenced by Alan Moore and Brian Bolland's The Killing Joke, but certainly not an adaptation of anything.
No.
the Joker figure is a failed stand-up comedian, but he is not involved in a robbery as he is in The Killing Joke. He's called Arthur Curry.
Editor's note: Arthur Curry is not the name of Joaquin Phoenix's character in Joker. His real name is Arthur Fleck. What am I doing with these amateurs? Seriously.
He is played by Joaquin Phoenix. He lives with his mother, who requires quite a lot of care. He has a medical condition which results in him bursting out into laughter at moments of tension or stress, of which he experiences a lot. And he is living in a Gotham which is, it's fair to say, a rundown scum pit even by Gotham City standards.
Yeah, because when you do get to see some of the more supposedly glamorous bits, they still look like a crap hole.
Yes.
Whereas at least, when we see the slums of Gotham in other adaptations of the city, you do have palatial, stately skyscrapers and brightly lit shopping malls next to the dark, dingy, scum-filled alleyways. But in this it all seems to be filled with scum.
It's all dinge all the time. Yeah. It's 100% dinge version of Gotham.
It's a grunge Gotham for the 21st century.
It's a Gotham so bleak that its one point of light is a late-night comedy chat show, and if that isn't depressing, I don't know what is.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's a Gotham so dingy that they probably find their only escape is a fortnight in Hartlepool.
But yes, the thing is, this is clearly, it seems to me, riffing off certain social anxieties of the late 70s and early 80s. It has, producer Rob will be delighted to know, a nod to Zorro the Gay Blade, which I think sets it pretty firmly in the early 80s.
It does indeed.
But there are bin strikes, there are nods to the Bernie Getz New York metro shooting that was, of course, celeb in the media in the 80s. It's very much trying to tap on into that kind of Taxi Driver, even New York scuzz, so much that Robert De Niro turns up.
Yeah. I think for me it had a bit of an identity crisis.
Yeah.
Because I think this would have been a much stronger film if it hadn't been called Joker and hadn't mentioned Gotham or the Waynes.
I can see that. I liked the ways that it tied into the wider Batman mythology, but part of me also thought, boy, I bet Lynn Ramsey's kicking herself. If she'd have called You Were Never Really Here, The Punisher, she could have gotten 90 million on opening weekend as well.
Damn it, Lynn, you had one job.
and if only they'd gone for Ghost Rider instead of Easy Rider.
Yes!
That would have been quite a different film.
Oh, in this case, I suppose the Sisters Brothers is high noon.
But yeah, it's and DC suffered from that illness that they've got. They still managed to crowbar the Batman origin story in.
Yeah, that's very true, actually.
Bloody hell, really?
Yeah. And that's where the nod to the Gay Blade comes, because in every other adaptation they've taken young Bruce to see the Mask of Zorro.
Yes.
But
the early 80s setting leaves you with perilously few
Zorro
for them to watch. And the one that they've come up with, I think, lacks the gravitas of the original.
Yeah, and I don't think it really lends itself to those brief glimpses in the background as the Waynes leave the cinema and go down Crime Alley. If you put The Mask of Zorro bracket 40th anniversary remastered director's cut, it really doesn't.
Yeah,
really doesn't cut the brief cut nature of the shot. But
yeah, I mean, other than this, we have this new version of the Joker, and it's worth stressing it is a very, very new version of the Joker, isn't it?
It is, but it's kind of where I've got a problem with it.
Yeah.
Because we've got an explanation for why the Joker is the way that he is.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a cop-out explanation.
I think there is an argument to be made, and I was ready to make it for much of this film, that it misunderstands what the Joker, and indeed what comic book characters in general, are meant to be. Mm-hmm. If you say, he just becomes a terrifying, uncontrollable symbol of anarchy because he had a bad childhood and lives in a crummy flat. I did sort of think, does that enhance the character? I think what turned it around for me is that I felt like it really, really stuck the ending.
I think for me, the problem for me with it is the Joker, as we know and loathe him as a comic book character, is the absolute personification of unadulterated evil and chaos and anarchy.
Yeah.
To explain that reduces it.
Yeah, I think so, and I feel most positively about this film when I think, well, when have DC ever wanted there to be a single Joker origin? Obviously, it's just meant to be a take on that story. It's never going to be the definitive thing.
No. I think because obviously the only real origin of the Joker that we've had as a named character on screen is the Jack Nicholson portrayal in 1989.
Yes, where the young Joker was played by Hugo Blick, who went on to terrorise the nation by writing and directing boring BBC Two drama series.
And if that isn't a personification of anarchy, chaos and unadulterated evil, I don't know what is. But the thing is, we had several explanations from Heath Ledger's Joker. Every time he explained his origin to how he got his trademark look was different to every character he told it to. So that kind of amorphous sort of backstory related by the character himself. I don't think we've ever had any doubt that the Joker is, to some degree or other, unhinged. But I think by giving him sort of, and I know they never mention the actual diagnosis, but to say that he has a symptomatic mental illness leads us to then be drawn into the possibility of empathising or sympathising, especially these days with so much mental health awareness going on.
Yeah.
It draws us into a position where we're sympathising and empathising with the Joker. And then that leads to a possibility where if in a future film there was a showdown between Batman and this Joaquin Phoenix Joker, we might end up rooting for the wrong side somehow.
There is that element, especially considering the Wayne family are depicted pretty toxically in this film, it would be fair to say. It is
a complete 180 on the way that they're normally depicted. There's normally some suggestion that for all their philanthropy and good deeds, there's some dark secrets in their past. But the general feeling is that on balance they are good people.
Yeah.
But in this, what a piece of work.
Yeah. And, I think that's fair enough, because if you're going to try and reinvent the story for the current generation, if you were writing Batman now, you'd have a hell of an uphill struggle trying to say that a billionaire who keeps threatening to run for essentially New York mayor is a great guy.
Yeah.
We all know the sort of people who do that in real life. They're not great guys.
No. But they do get the top jobs in government.
Yes.
But yeah, so I mean, and this is why it kind of jarred a little bit for me, and this is why I think it would have been a much better standalone movie away from that DC link. Because effectively, what you've got is American Psycho, but with a poor guy.
Yes.
Because there are whole sequence, but there are whole sequences where you don't know whether it's reality or not.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And that was the other major flaw I had with it. There's one sequence, particularly the bit where he's tailing Sophie Dumond, played by Zazie Beetz, and the trapped and claustrophobic visual imagery could not have been laid on more thick unless they'd sort of like done the audio description thing and put the words claustrophobic and trapped
in
bright neon letters 10 feet high. He's walking behind a fence. He's stuck in a lift.
Yes.
Oh, come on, guys.
The bit with Zazie Beetz was, I think, the one real serious misgiving I have with the film, in that, firstly, I think she's too interesting an actress to be trapped in this fairly dull, limited role, but also, for all Todd Phillips has talked about wanting to invoke, the spirit of 70s crime films and do something that felt dangerous with this, I cannot imagine, Abel Ferrara or someone giving their anti-hero a black girlfriend just for the purpose of saying, look, we know he's an angry white guy, but he's not one of those angry white guys, okay?
Yeah, that sounds very misguided, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And next year in cinemas, I'll look forward to Morrissey's Joker.
Oh, God.
Which would, of course, be called That Joker Isn't Funny Anymore.
Indeed.
I have to admit, I swiped that joke from you, but it got a laugh, so it's fine.
I'll let you go. I'll let it go this time.
Morally, the laugh was yours.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, my attitude towards DC as a general kind of company who were making steps into cinema, and those steps seem to be, incredibly rickety and frequently standing on rotten beams for the hell of it. But my feeling is it was understandable that they wanted to have a shared universe, but it was also strange because so many of the DC stories that people remember, whether that's The Killing Joke or Red Son or The Dark Knight Returns, are kind of what-if-else world stories.
Yeah.
And I suppose this is maybe why the strange use of existing Batman mythology bothered me less, because if you come to Joker thinking, this is basically the first film adaptation of an Elseworld story, it's pretty satisfying, I think.
I mean, funnily enough, we did a piece on 4Panel, another podcast of this parish, on the small screen adaptations of comics. And I believe that episode will be available shortly. And DC are winning that one, hands down, of the two big ones. I mean, there's a lot of independent-based comics as adapted for TV as well. But I think both DC and the indies are more character-based comics anyway. They focus on characters, whereas Marvel has always had that element of spectacle about it anyway, and therefore lends itself better to that big screen summer blockbuster, spring, autumn, summer, Christmas.
Summer, which for the purposes of the cinematic release calendar begins in February and ends in December.
Absolutely, that's global warming for you. And I think the ability to explore those characters over 10-hour-long episodes actually works in DC's favour.
Yeah.
Because their characters tend to have more of a sort of layered backstory.
But in terms of exploring a character in 2 hours, I don't think you can really ask for better than what Joaquin Phoenix is giving.
No, I like I say, it's my only two gripes are that heavy imagery, and I think it would have been a better film without the links. I think they spoil the Joker for me, but then I'm a comic book nerd.
Yeah.
And, I'm sick of the Bruce Wayne origin story.
Well, that's fair enough. Yeah, I could manage it seeing from the other side of the telescope, but I don't know how I feel. I kind of like this standalone, but when I left the theatre, I just found myself thinking, if this was the first film DC put out in a shared universe, everyone would be going, "That was amazing! I can't wait to see more of that."
But I think I think the fact that, as we mentioned at the top of the piece, they barely mentioned the fact that they were involved.
Yes.
And now, Village Roadshow Pictures, in association with Warner Brothers, present a footnote in the history of DC. Which kind of tells you that the studio don't have faith in this as a project. It's almost like they've been bitten so many times. They've had the rave reviews for Wonder Woman.
Mm.
And then Joker.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't know. I went in being quite cynical about it, and I find the people who have talked about this as being an evolution of the comic book movie a bit annoying, because if we're to take that absolutely seriously, what it means is that the future of comic book movies is them trying desperately not to be comic book movies.
Yeah. And I think it did have... I think if you'd have gone in there, having lived under a rock for the last 70 years, just going to see a film with Joaquin Phoenix in called Joker, you wouldn't have known from that film that it was based on comic books.
No, but, I'd have also really enjoyed it. I mean, my main anxiety going through it was when I was looking at Arthur Fleck at his most incapacitated and beaten down by life. I was thinking, I really can't buy this guy as a criminal mastermind. And yet, by the final act, I thought, oh no, I can see that starting to happen. And I think you have to credit Phoenix for that. I don't think it's there in the script. No. I think the script is honestly pretty thin. And I don't think Todd Phillips, the director of The Hangover Part 3, is sophisticated enough to get it in there on himself. It is entirely Phoenix's doing, and he deserves all the praise for that.
Well, you say that, but Todd Phillips is obviously a criminal mastermind because he managed to get a trilogy out of The Hangover.
He can't do comedy anymore because of all the wokenesses, Mick.
I was about to say the exact same thing. The wokeness.
That could be a film.
All of the wokes. The wokeness. Yeah.
Oh. I'm thinking it's a sort of 21st century anti-slasher flick where this psychopathic urge to give people a hug takes over this small-town teenage boy, and he doesn't break in under cover of darkness. He rings the bell politely during daylight, and waits until the teenage babysitter's parents come home.
This time, Jason faces his toughest opponent. People who point out to him that he really is a very bad stereotype of mentally ill people.
Well, that's got box office gold written all over it.
Any closing thoughts before we go to recommendations?
No, I genuinely went to the cinema expecting to be disappointed by this, but what I actually found myself watching was quite a well-executed character piece that kind of, to my mind, worked really well and was a much better movie than I had ever credited. This is from the man who, when it was announced, went, a Joker movie?
A Joker origin movie at that.
Who needs that in their life?
Yeah.
But yes, I liked it in spite of myself. I think the studio's marketing strategy of getting the director and star to act like an absolute dong for a month on the publicity trail was, well, I mean, I'm not a PR guy, but it seems misguided to me. But I ended up being surprisingly thoroughly won over. So, I mean, recommendations, there's a pretty obvious shopping list of, all of the films that it's paying homage to, isn't there?
And I guess, let's say that there is actually a film that also combines superheroism and mental issues, which is Birdman.
Oh, good call. Yes, I like that. I like that suggestion very much.
Which a colleague of mine... I don't think he listens to the podcast, but I'll not say his name just in case. A colleague of mine came into the office and he said, I watched that Birdman that you recommended. I didn't like it. I said, why not? He said, because I was expecting a comic book movie.
Oh.
He was literally expecting it to be, I don't know, Hawkman, the movie.
Yes, yeah. While we're talking about people who are disappointed by their films, I just want to talk about these astonishing newspaper articles we're having about terrified fans walking out of Joker and calling for it to be banned. I've got one from the Daily Mirror here, and they've got, I hope you're sitting down for this, they've got 3 tweets.
3?
3 whole tweets. 3 tweets.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, if that was a referendum, that could seriously cause a divided nation, that.
It's the biggest democratic margin in the history of film Twitter. One of which, and again, Cinema Eclectica does not endorse these extreme sentiments, one of which says in its entirety, I don't like the Joker, it's too dark.
Oh, wow.
Well, I'll be honest, I don't think there's any call for that kind of vitriol in a public forum. I mean, everybody's entitled to their opinion and to vocalise it and share it with the world, but that level of language is just intolerable in the modern society.
It's like that story when you said about La La Land and someone criticised Graham when someone criticised it for being, oh yeah, La La Land, I don't like it, it's just a bunch of singing and dancing.
Yes! A thing that actually happened.
But yeah, I know a lot of people have complained that the violence in Joker is too graphic or too gratuitous, but look at the character that's being portrayed, Well,
yeah, I mean, it's strange, isn't it? Because in terms of actual screen minutage devoted to violent incidents, this is the least violent comic book movie I've seen in years.
Indeed.
What makes it different is that when people get hurt in this, there is blood.
Yes, and as far as we know, they don't return in a sequel.
Yes.
I'm Christopher Sabat, the voice of Roanoke Zorro, and you're listening to The Geek Show on thegeekshow.co.uk. What up?
Hello, this is Ryan from the Geek Show Podcast Network. Do you like trees? What about paper? What about words? Yes, words are good. Then you will like Literally Loitering, all available on the Geek Show Podcast Network.
So if you're enjoying what you're listening to, you can help us keep producing these podcasts by donating to our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show. The Geek Show, which is our parent network, is on Facebook. Just search for The Geek Show. And it's also on Twitter. Search for TGS_The Geek Show.
All right, let's get a message to Joe's house. I respect what he's done. The new overthrows the old. It's natural.
How can you do business with this guy?
I'm a businessman. First and foremost, I want no further conflict with him.
You tell him from me that he can live or he can die.
Vincent, will you shut up? You can't be doing this alone. Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
So, yes, if you go to thegeekshow.co.uk, you can find our written reviews, exclusive reviews of films we do not cover on the podcast. Aidan, you have been reviewing Werewolf, have you not?
Yes. No, just mild spoiler alert, no, there is no werewolves in the actual film.
Oh, it's like the werewolf movie equivalent of Joker then. It teases you with the genre elements, but doesn't deliver.
Is it werewolf spelled W-H-E-R-E, wolf?
I have also put up a couple of reviews of the Soska Sisters remake of David Cronenberg's Rabid, and the new second run, Journey to the Beginning of Time by Carol Zeman. But now we are entering our off-the-shelf section, and Mick, I think you're up first, right?
That's right. Having watched the Sammo Hung trilogy from Eureka, which is out this week on Blu-ray, so I guess you could say I'm now well hung.
Nice.
So this trilogy contains 3 Sammo Hung movies. Iron Fisted Monk. I'm now regretting the well hung gag. The Magnificent Butcher, who will no doubt be coming after me because of the well hung gag, and the Eastern Condors, who no doubt will pick up the carcass of my well hung corpse. So, I've got a long, if stuttered, history with Chinese martial arts. I watched Enter the Dragon when I was a teenager, and then I did Once Upon a Time in China for this very podcast.
You did indeed, yes.
And now I've done this. So that's spanning 38 years, but 5 movies. It's a bit like the Universal Dark Universe, really, isn't it? But
it's a bit like George R.R. Martin's writing schedule.
Yeah, except I got to the end of these. So, Iron Fisted Monk is the earliest film, and I'll do Magnificent Butcher and Iron Fisted Monk together because they're similar settings. The difference being that Sammo Hung didn't direct the Magnificent Butcher.
Right.
But Iron Fisted Monk, feudal China, Oscar's in training at a monastery, having been sent there by a former monk to learn how to help people. He's set on revenge on the Manchus who killed his uncle, which we find out about in a flashback sequence probably about a third of the way into the movie. And the Manchus are a kind of bunch of ruffians who terrorise the town where Oscar grew up. They're a sort of Peking Blinders, if you like.
Nice.
Oh.
What?
Damn it.
Took me days to come up with.
The pun makes the review. That's always been our motto.
Now, the thing about both these two feudal ones is they pile on the subplots. So for Iron Fisted Monk, there are seemingly random elements brought together to move the plot along. So the Manchu's elder brother, who isn't mentioned for about the first 2/3 of the movie, comes home from his imperial palace diplomatic duties. And he seems likely to calm his siblings down because obviously they've been a little bit naughty. And he comes back home and gives them a lecture about, whatever they do reflects on his role at the palace. And there's several other bits and pieces of, people getting wronged and accidentally the Fu Manchus get foiled by Oscar and then he brings down... it's all a bit Looney Tunes. And in the Magnificent Butcher... Hung's character is Porky Wing, who's he inadvertently starts a war between his school and the neighbouring Five Dragons school. And again, it's all quite Brian Ricks-style farce, one accident causing a consequence and snowballing and snowballing and snowballing. My favourite bit from The Magnificent Butcher, however, and it's the first time I think these 3 words have ever been put together, there's a calligraphy brush fight. I'm going to say that again so that you can use in the edit the correct pronunciation. Calligraphy brush fight. It is quite the most beautiful thing I've ever seen committed to celluloid. A fight between two martial arts masters where their only weapons are calligraphy brushes. And they even select different brushes for different fight stances. It's incredible. But the thing is, it's like Carry On Fighting for most of it. But the thing that jars across both these two movies is, and I know that they were made many moons ago when we all thought differently, but I'm fairly certain that even in the late 70s and early 80s, generally just putting women in a film so that they can be raped and murdered wasn't sort of deemed light comedy.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
even the confessions of the cycle never sank to that level.
Exactly. And that is the disturbing element of these. And they don't happen off screen. They're not events that occur and are just talked about or mentioned, or you see the aftermath or the lead up to. You see it happen on the screen. It's not particularly graphic. I'm not saying it should be 18 rated, but it really jars against the quite over-the-top comedic delivery of the rest of the film.
Well, didn't the first film, Iron Fist at Monk, just get passed through the BBFC uncut recently, or something like that? Because I remember, like, Eureka posting it on their site or something, or the Facebook page at the time.
A lot of those classic martial arts films were cut for absolutely bizarre reasons. In James Furman, when he was head of the BBFC in the 70s and 80s, just thought that nunchucks in general should be cut from everything.
Okay, right.
I don't know whether that's what happened here, but it could be.
I mean, like I said, they're not particularly graphic scenes. I mean, the murder is because it's like with a blade and stuff. It's as graphic as it needs to be, really. You get the impression that she's just been stabbed to death. But, you know, the only female parts in here that have got speaking roles are future rape or murder victims. If they're not rape or murder victims, they'll probably get a beat down somewhere along the line. Which, you know, it's like I say, although it's not sort of Joker levels of violence, it's still unsavoury within the context of the rest of the film, which, as I say, is like a carry-on. The one that gets me is that there's one girl who gets raped. She's then in a sort of catatonic shock state in her room. Her brother goes in to check that she's all right, and because she won't talk, he then slaps her almost as hard as the guy who attacked her in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, Magnificent Butcher, again, it's a farce. There's lots and lots of set-up revenge. And for me, they're almost like Mickey takes of that Bruce Lee era of martial arts. I guess the reason that I carried on through to the end is because they, with the graphic brutality to women aside, other than that, they kind of reminded me of the old Monkey TV series with that very tongue-in-cheek, overly stylized, choreographed martial arts fights, and that almost who cares about acting? We're having fun approach to the delivery. The thing is, the acting style, which probably it's detracted from because I was watching it with the English dubs on, and the English voice actors who have dubbed these films were clearly on the end of a cell phone and only getting paid national minimum wage.
Yes.
Because they have put no emotion into the fight sequences. Aha! I'll have you. I will kill you now. Just watch me as I put this calligraphy brush in your eye. So that kind of mars the acting, but even the facial expressions. I mean, you know, if there was an Oscar for mugging, Sammo Hung would win it annually. So yeah, but for a change of pace, the third film in the trilogy is Eastern Condors, which is set in 1976, post-Vietnam, and you've got a couple of Chinese high-ranking officers visit a US airbase and get given a mission where they're given some Chinese prisoners of the American army. The American military have arrested these guys, and they've handpicked 10 of them to form a unit to go and rescue an arsenal that was lost in Vietnam by the Americans. The reason that they need to send this squad in is because obviously it's a bit embarrassing if America has to go into Vietnam anyway. And secondly, saying that you've lost an arsenal kind of gives it away to the Viet Cong that maybe there's some weapons kicking about.
Yes.
So, and the opening sequence of this, basically the two Chinese officers turn up on a jeep into the airbase, and the American troops are having their welcome to foreign dignitary ceremony, and the guy who's hoisting the flag, the rope has jumped off its pulley, so he can't actually raise the flag. And you think, all right, we're going down the carry-on route again. And then what happens is they get bored of waiting for him to fix this, and they drive on, and they go get given the mission, and they chat to the colonel, and then as they're driving back off the base towards where the prisoners are held so that they can inspect their new squad, they pull up, effectively say, these Americans are so stupid, and then the junior officer jumps out of the jeep, shins up the flagpole, fixes the rope, shins back down, gets in, and they drive off. So you're still thinking it's going to be carry on Kong. But from that point on, it becomes pretty much a sort of Chinese Dirty Dozen.
Right.
With a little touch. The cinematography has borrowed heavily from Platoon. There's a very early 80s action feel to the score. In fact, there's one track when they actually get to the arsenal and they're looking at the weapons that they've retrieved as part of the mission. There's one track that sounds like the opening bars of Vienna, almost note perfect.
Right.
But it's actually, I'm not a big fan of your 80s Vietnam action movie, but I actually really enjoyed this one. There's a little all-girl Cambodian gang of resistance fighters that have been arranged to rendezvous with the Dirty Dozen, for want of a better phrase, who are a sort of, I don't know, ass-whooping Bananarama of the Vietnamese jungle. And there's a subplot in there that somewhere on the mission there's a spy that's feeding information to the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong guy who's running operations and is the bad guy has got to be the campest bad guy I've ever come across.
Right.
You think that some of Joaquin Phoenix's laughing in Joker was high-pitched. There are moments when this guy's laughing where only dogs can hear him, and only dolphins respond. But for all that, it's cinematically fantastic. Gone are the sort of almost TV studio-looking sets of the first two movies in the box set. And you've got these sumptuous jungle sets. I think it was filmed on location in the Philippines. You've got massive explosions. There's bridge over the River Kwai style set scenes. And a beautiful panoramic shot as we leave the action at the end of the movie. And these guys realise that they've achieved what they needed to, and they're free now. It's almost like those old-style Bond movies where you got that massive shot of some exotic location from a helicopter. And it's just... The production values on it are so way above what there is in the first two films. It's almost like you find yourself thinking, hold on, have I picked up this from the wrong box set here? So I went into it thinking, I watched the first one. It took me 2 attempts to watch the first one. I really had to sort of sit down and force myself to watch the first one. The second one, just because of the calligraphy brush fight, I stuck with it in case there was another one. I'll be honest.
Right.
I think there's a Chinese tradition where there's a sort of wooden plaque created in memory of someone who's been killed or has died, and they even have a fight involving one of those.
Right.
And that, it's not quite calligraphy brush fighting, but it's close.
Yeah.
And so that, I was kind of warming to young Sammo by this point, but it was Eastern Condors for me that marked that transition of Sammo Hung, because from the first one and the second one, he was just a chancer who knew some moves and had written some scripts and had got lucky and found someone who was going to put it together, a sort of Chinese Ben Stiller, if you like. And by the but by the third one, he'd actually turned into quite an accomplished actor-director and produced Tropic Thunder. So, you see where I went with that?
I said, yeah, I was confused at first, but you
Yeah.
solved it. Yeah.
Yeah, you cleared up all of the fog, yeah.
You see, that's how I spend my weekends. Coming up with gold like
Fabulous.
that and Peking Blinders. And I do it for you, listeners. Remember that. When you're looking for who to play.
So, off to you, Aidan.
Okay then, so we normally do a segment on Off the Shelf called Devil's Advocate, where we look at films that people love, for unanimous reasons that the person reviewing it doesn't, or people overwhelmingly dislike a film that other people love. And, I fall in the later camp this week, the latter camp. Where I'm going to be talking about, perhaps one of the most, I guess, disappointing prequels to ever exist, the most disappointing third installment of a film franchise ever.
Yeah.
And that film that we're going to be talking about today is The Godfather Part 3.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this has gone down, it came out in 1990, and, an awful lot of people have, pretty much bad-mouthed it quite a lot of the time. Normally due to criticisms that I'll, expand upon in the review. But most people often agree that it's, it's mostly disappointing. It doesn't fulfill, it's a shadow of, the other two films, etc., etc. But I'm going to let you in on a dirty little secret of mine. And I'm going to get unbearably close to the microphone just to express this viewpoint. I actually really like it.
Burn him! Burn him as a witch!
I was expecting a shamed whisper, but you came through loud and clear there.
Yes, here we go. So, this is, basically I'm going to throw everything in the chuck it bucket and say, screw you, internet, but essentially... So yeah, this is the final installment of the Godfather trilogy, and we see Michael Corleone, once again played by Al Pacino, seeking to legitimise his crime family once again. Of course, he's a lot more withered this time, because, by the first two installments, he's done some pretty horrible things to establish his rise to power. So he's overtaken the underworld, but then he's beginning to wither, so what he does to expand his empire is expand it towards Rome ways, and this involves ties to the Vatican Bank and the church, so there's ties to John Paul I here as well. And then essentially what you've got is Michael Corleone conquers the world, really.
Right.
And along the way, he figures out they can no longer, take control of his crime family and sets up his nephew, Vincent Corleone, who's played by, I believe it's Andy Garcia in this.
Yes.
He's, you may notice, because his character is actually the illegitimate son of Sonny from the first film played by James Caan. So he takes up the moniker, and eventually it also goes down the route of the, I guess what I want to say, the guilt, the more remorse angle than, the previous Godfathers had established, really, of what Michael had committed, really. And that's really, I think, the best way to go into this, because... I guess why people find so heavily disappointed with this is because it's essentially in the shadow of the former two films, really. That some of the elements it does is weaker, for example, it's a very soap opera-ish setup in its essence, where you do have Michael Corleone going back to his family, and especially in the case of his children as well. His oldest son, I think Anthony's his name, becomes an opera singer. And Mary, who's Mary Corleone, who's now played by Sofia Coppola in the purposes of The Godfather Part 3. And, I guess this is where most people's most hated elements with The Godfather Part 3 comes up, and that is the form of Mary Corleone. Now, were you two aware of the controversy surrounding Sofia Coppola's casting in this?
When you said Mary Corleone played here by Sofia Coppola, my first thought was, we come to it at last.
And me, as you know, I only watched Godfather Part 1 for this very podcast. And I was kind of waiting for an opportunity to talk about Godfather 2 first. But, so I've not got around to watching Godfather 3 yet. So I'm sure Sophie...
Yeah, I'll try and keep it spoiler-ish.
I'm sure Sophia's marvellous in it.
Yeah, considering to say, like, she got slaughtered for the purpose of this film. And I'll be honest, I mean, most of the arguments I've seen towards Sofia Coppola's performance, I mean, I'm going to agree, it's not particularly a great performance. I mean, it is very wooden in that regard, where eventually, of course, she would blossom into, like, a first world-rate director of own once acting wasn't her foray, really. But I've often felt the arguments towards a performance is, like, very, dare I say it, very petty in a way.
Yeah.
Because she often gets, like, badmouthed an awful lot, like she's the sole focus for ruining this film, and I've never seen myself agreeing with that, because one, I don't think she's central enough to the plot anyway. I mean, you do get, like, some plot elements into this film that, you know, do raise some, like, eyebrows, like, for instance, her relationship with Vincent, which is, like, obviously tying into themes of incest, which, you know, can be seen as pretty ill-advised in a lot of areas, and I would agree with that, but at the same time, you know, I don't think it's, like, big of a problem to lobby on her shoulders an awful lot of the time. And that's especially true when you actually consider that Mary Corleone was initially supposed to be played by Winona Ryder.
Yeah.
And I just think that, you know, she stepped in last minute, Sofia Coppola, to play the role. And I just think that, you know, I don't think it's 100% her fault. It's definitely not her fault. I've never felt that way to begin with. I don't think it's a very true argument, really. But then you get to the other segments of Michael's, like, grieving process, and that's when I think, like, The Godfather Part 3 truly starts to shine. Because there's a huge segment in, like the third, like, middle act of the film where he goes to Sicily, obviously where Vito grew up, if you've seen, like, the flashback sequences with Robert De Niro in Part 2.
Yeah.
And I often found it quite striking, really, because here we see Michael just, you know, feeling some degrees of sympathy for the horrible acts he committed in the other two films, really. That finally he's starting to reconnect the dots with Diane Keaton's character once and for all, who, as we've seen in, like, the end of the first film, you know, obviously their relationships begins to, like, teeter in the opposite direction. And there's just this heavy sense of, I guess I want to say, like, a romance starting to blossom once again between the two, but at the same time you can certainly sense tragedy tinging between the two. Like, for example, it starts off small, like they go off to see Vito's old, like, house in the outbacks of Sicily. There's different aspects entirely, like the feeling of, like, maybe they haven't been the best parents in the world towards the two children. And I find that quite gratifying in a way.
Yeah.
In a way that characters haven't been expressed before. Maybe not as clearly as the other two, which I know, you know, considering that what I've just said is, like, treason. I still can't help it. I think it's quite commendable stuff, really. But I think that's not one of the only strengths it has. I mean, there's the common criticism as well that it's perhaps Godfather Part 3 is, like, too big for its own good. I mean, and you can certainly see that in some of the action sequences where there's aspects of violence in the first two films which is quite subtle, dark, eerie. But in the third one, you know, it kind of, like, ranches it up into 11, where you have, like, a helicopter, like, blast open, like, the New York Don's house, and, like, I think the first half of the film where the main antagonist of that particular half, played by Joe Montagna, who plays Joey Zaza, basically commends, like, all of the Dons to hell, and then just basically sets loose a helicopter to blast open, like, the heavens, really. In that case, yeah, it is a bit ridiculous. It does feel a bit die-hard, but at the same time, you know what, to give it credit, you know, from a technical aspect, I find it quite fun. It's just, I think that's just down to taste. I mean, yeah, I can totally understand the criticism that, yeah, it does feel a bit out of place, but at the same time, you know what, I kind of enjoy it.
Yeah.
We've also got, this is like the turn in the mode where Al Pacino started to become shouty Pacino.
Yes.
I assume it's like towards after, like, you know, Scarface, where he just shouted towards the heavens. But at the same time, you know, a lot of his performance, he's a lot of the time he's very low key, very growly. And you know what? I didn't find it as, like, irritating or over the top as what some of his later performances would be.
Yeah.
for a moment, there's a bit where he actually goes to remorse the sins that he committed in the second film and the first, and with the Cardinal. And for a moment, it's like incredibly, I think, actually well performed for his credit, because it's just this very just bereavement segment that, honestly, that you wouldn't, I guess, dream of seeing in the first two films. I think it's well judged for that manner, and it culminates in a sequence, basically the opera sequence, really, which I think is very strong in that regard. There's often, and it's done in like that classic mode to end like one of the Godfather films, like, think the baptism sequence in the first film.
Yeah.
I think it's like touching on similar themes, but I think the difference is that Michael is, now that he's given up the crime lifestyle altogether, he's basically totally unaware of the violent surroundings that are happening, amongst him, really. So, overall, honestly, I just don't think it's the disappointment that a lot of people make it out to be. I mean, I think where a lot of it comes from is that,
Is it possible that it's just the fact that it's 16 years between part 2 and part 3, and that just the way that people enjoy and people write films has changed? I mean, 2 years between part 1 and part 2, and Coppola himself sees it as a 2-film arc, with part 3 being very much an epilogue. Is it there's a difference in the way that people... Because I think late 80s, early 90s, we were starting to get more into those sort of soapy type movies, weren't we?
No, thank you for saying that, because that is very true, because it was like, I guess that 16-year wait where it did, like, I guess ruin a lot of things, because you've also got to remember that this was released on Christmas Day as well in 1990. Which, judging from the modern era now, with the Star Wars movies getting released, that builds like a certain level of hype that only like a few blockbuster franchises can rival, really.
It's essentially it's your present, isn't it? It's Hollywood giving you a Christmas present. It's got to be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course it's difficult to ride the crest of your existing popularity when that wave sailed 16 years previously.
Yes, yeah.
You're talking about a whole generation of people nearly that didn't grow up with your movie in the first place.
Yeah. But no, I think you're right there. It's certainly that lack of involvement with the franchise in that gap, because you got to remember that, like, the first two films have become like cultural institutions by the time the third one was released. So... And I think that's part of the reason why I kind of like it so much, because it's not... I don't really see it as the third installment of a franchise. I see it as more of an epilogue to, like, Michael Corleone's character. And I think that works for me an awful lot more. Granted, it can be, like, seen as a disappointment in some eyes. I guess, like, some people weren't ready for it to take, like, such a differing point of view, really. Because a lot of it... Because by this point, Ford Coppola's reputation had essentially, after, like, Apocalypse Now, had, like, diminished in quality. Some worse than others. I mean, like, some of his 80s films aren't actually too bad. I mean, Rumblefish is pretty decent. But then, of course, he would later go on to make Jack, and we don't talk about Jack. And that's a perfectly acceptable thing. I can totally understand that. But at the same time... as an epilogue, I find it quite satisfying. There's some elements to it that, I think really do work. I think Andy Garcia is, like, pretty damn bang on for his portrayal as Vincent. He cements himself as, like, all the three Corleone men that came before him. Like, of course, he's got, like, Sonny's bad temper, Michael's cold calculativeness, Vito's suaveness, I suppose. And, I think it's certainly got its good elements to it, really. That I can't help but say that, what? I don't really see it as bad as, like, some people have made it out to be, really.
Right. I've never got round to seeing The Godfather Part 3, largely because of that bad buzz. But, yeah, you might have persuaded me to give it a go there.
And don't forget, of course, next year sees the release of Godfather Part 4, Parabellum.
Bravo. Well done. That's a very good
So, out next week, a few small releases we'll just cover before we get on to the big stuff. There's American Woman by Jake Scott, starring Sienna Miller, Christina Hendricks and Aaron Paul. Sienna Miller is, of course, a British woman, who we're fact-checking there. We've got Farming, the semi-autobiographical directorial debut from, oh God, I wish I didn't have to say this, but I'm locked in now, Adewale Akinoye Agbaje.
Round of applause there, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well done. Take a bow, Graham.
Thank you. This looks really good, actually. This has had some interesting early press, and it's got Gugu Mbatha Raw in, and I love Gugu Mbatha Raw. And I'm not saying this is specifically aimed at men of a certain age, but Mick, there is Susie Q, a documentary about Susie Quattro.
Well, I'm sold.
Yeah.
Well, you did the Joan Jett. You did the Joan Jett documentary last year, so
give me an American woman in leather, and I'm there. If she's got a guitar, even better.
But yes, the big stories are 300 Cinema Plus releases. There's Abominable, which is, I think it's like the fourth cartoon Yeti film of this past year. It's a thing.
Apparently.
I was wondering whether it was part of a franchise, because I know there was there another one called Smallfoot? I couldn't think whether it was Smallfoot or Littlefoot, but so that's a franchise thing, is it?
That's enough for a cinematic universe, I'd say.
Well, yeah.
So there's that. There's Gemini Man, which I think will be great because it's got loads of frames. Frames make everything great, and the more frames there are, the better the film is. That's how cinema works.
And also it gives you the chance to be disappointed by Will Smith twice.
Yeah, this is directed by Ang Lee, isn't it?
It's
after Life of Pi. He hasn't had like the best start, really, has he?
What the hell's he even doing? Would be my considered judgment.
What I would say is it's a very efficient way of getting disappointed by Will Smith. You don't have to wait 3 years for the next movie to come out.
Yes, that's true. Also, before we move off this, mad props to Edgar Wright, who tweeted, Hollywood, save money on a Gemini Man sequel by just casting Paul Rudd. And finally, unfortunately, this film can't exist because you can't do dangerous comedy because of the wokeness now, but it is the new Chris Morris film, The Day Shall Come.
Oh, I'm sure you can't make Jojo Rabbit in this day and age.
This is Chris Morris versus the FBI anti-terror squad with Merchant Davis, Anna Kendrick, and his Four Lions star Kevin Novak. And yes, you're damn right, it's our film of the week next week.
This has been Graham's most anticipated film of, like, the past 2 years.
It's a new Chris Morris film. What could be better?
2 Chris Morris films.
Well, steady on there, Ang Lee. But yes, until next week with The Day Shall Come, that's been your lot from Cinema Eclectica. I've been Graham.
I've been Mick.
And I've been Aidan.
See you next week.
Jesus.
What's up? Nobu run out of starfish?
No. It's reached the Oval Office. Clay has caused Homeland Security to declare a nuclear emergency on your empty canisters.
Well, he's having some kind of breakdown.
All right, we're taking over.
Whoa.
Right, okay. What do you need from me, sir?
Right. Well, we know this emergency is groundless.
Correct.
But the emergency exists.
Right.
And you can't take control of something if you're saying it doesn't exist.
Okay.
So we have to acknowledge that the emergency exists.
Yeah. Well, no, sorry. If we say, yes, it exists, isn't that the same as declaring a nuclear emergency ourselves?
Technically, yourself, but yeah.
So, to stop a nuclear emergency, I have to declare a nuclear emergency?
Yes, the logic only works if you say it slowly. Keep the contradictory elements apart.
Well, I would look insane.
Only if you say it fast. And also, you already looked insane when you met me in the parking lot.
So you're just going to throw her under the bus?
No, I would never do that to an agent. She has to do it herself. And the alternative is dancing in the wood chipper.